The reason why you're all here tonight is to hear about top tips for the winter woods. Even though it's going to be in the 50s tomorrow, winter is going to come because we're in Minnesota. And tonight we have Scott to talk about best tips and techniques to help you survive and thrive during the worst of winter, to keep your feet warm and dress for Arctic conditions, and keep your body's furnace running hot, gear tips, all kinds of things so that you'll be prepared when winter does come to keep being out there in the outdoors. Scott grew up spending hours exploring the forest out his back door and exploring the outdoors with his family. He's an Eagle Scout, and he's had a lifelong involvement in Scouts, including volunteering as National High Adventure Base Instructor. He's a registered Maine guide, and he's been trained as a Minnesota Master Naturalist, a wilderness first responder, a wilderness survival instructor, and he's been to lots and lots of wilderness and survivor skills courses. He founded Bull Moose Patrol with his wife, Linda Hardin, in 2014. When Scott is not on the trail or out doing these things, he is busy as a certified financial planner and spends a lot of time on the volleyball court. And he earned All-American honors on playing volleyball. So I want to welcome Scott, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for the intro, Fran. Sorry, I should have sent you a short version, but I appreciate it. And I like what Carl said about most of you are live-it people in the outdoors, and I recognize that there's probably a lot of you have just a wealth of experience and knowledge, and oftentimes when I do these types of talks or presentations, I come away, learning, I think, more than I gave out in terms of comments and questions. So I'm just, at the time that we have here, I'm going to share some top tips, I think, on, staying warm in the winter, and a bit on winter camping, and maybe a few winter survival tips. And certainly won't be able to cover it all, but hopefully hit some highlights and, share some things of value. So Bull Moose Patrol, what are we all about? This is a hobby business for me, but it's definitely a deep passion. As Fran mentioned, I grew up in Scouts, was lucky enough to grow up with the University of Wisconsin Arboretum out my back door, Arboretum that Aldo Leopold helped design to recreate the biomes of Wisconsin, as white settlers came in, and that literally was my playground. Spent all kinds of hours cross-country skiing, hiking, building forts, and enjoying that. I had a wonderful experience in scouting, stay involved to this day as an adult volunteer. Particularly, relevant to this presentation is the local Minneapolis-St. Paul Council has a really good winter camping program where they get about 1,000 kids a year, actually more, out camping out of a couple bases. And so I've taught at their winter camping school for that. And also at the National Scouts High Adventure Base up in the Boundary Waters, where we run a week-long cold weather leader school. So the idea there is it's train the trainer event where people come from all over the country, and we talk about the art and science of winter camping, and then take them out for a couple of nights in the Boundary Waters. So there's the blog bullmoosepatrol.com, and been working on getting all my webinars like this and blog posts, and I have a monthly radio spot all in one place as a winter resource page. So if you're interested in hearing more, and there's a lot more on some of these topics, if you go to bullmoosepatrol.com, on the front there's a winter resource page, and it's like a big link roundup of a lot of this stuff. Speak at events like this, and teach classes, and that's something I'm excited about. I have a arrangement worked out now with the Rice Creek Chain of Lakes Regional Park and Wargo Nature Center, where we'll now be teaching hands-on classes there, as before it was kind of sporadic and at different locations. So we'll have the calendar for that posted shortly. If you're interested in hearing more, send me an email or sign up for our email list, and we'll get that out. We're hoping to have a couple classes, hands-on workshop type skills courses each month. And time allowing, I love actually taking people in the field and guiding wilderness trips. So particular passions, I love wilderness canoe camping, particularly taking Boundary Waters people, kind of that next level river trips with a bit of whitewater. Very interested in traditional skills, so poling and solo paddling, the traditional style, winter camping, and wilderness survival and bushcraft, really the skills of the North Woods of our area here in Minnesota. So, okay, so who likes being cold? No one, I take it, right? And who wants their season to end? All right, no one. Okay, if you live here in Minnesota, if you can't find something fun to do in the winter, you should probably move. You know, we need to keep getting outside, but how do we do it? Have a safe time, have fun, not be cold and miserable. I had enough of those experiences as a youth, so I have a lot of particular interest in trying to figure out how to stay warm. I think one of the first things we like to talk about when we're teaching cold weather leader school is, don't get wrecked. What are the mechanisms of heat loss? And just going through these, a lot of these, people know, they're intuitive, but it's amazing how people kind of forget. And one of the things, it's much easier to stay warm than to try and get warm. Okay, it's a lot easier to stay dry than to try and get dry. And one of the things I really like about winter camping and just winter events in general is, the solitude, the beauty, no bugs, no bears, fewer people. All that's great. You don't have to go as far for it to be a big adventure. But I also really like the science of it, the planning and the preparation. And you have less daylight. It's much less forgiving environment. Things take longer in the snow and on the ice. You can't move as quickly or you get all sweated up. So you really need to be thinking. It's like a chess match, 2 or 3 moves ahead. And in terms of these mechanisms of heat loss, being sort of exaggerating your awareness of these can really help you stay warm and prevent you from getting cold. So RECT, what does that stand for? Well, different ways our body can lose heat. Radiation, we're giving off heat all the time into the atmosphere. We insulate with clothing to protect against that. Respiration, particularly in the cold winter environment, you're breathing in dry air, your body is warming it up and you lose moisture and you lose heat for respiration. Evaporation, this is a challenging one. I think Fran mentioned the temperatures aren't as cold as they usually are, but this is prime hypothermia season right now, even more than when it's deep cold. If you get these type of temperatures or what they've been over the last month, if you get damp, you get a bit of wind, it's bad news. So wet clothing, wet cotton can wick away body heat 25 times faster than dry clothing. Convection, touching cold surfaces, that heat transfer happens instantly. I can hold my hand an inch or 2 above frozen ice or the cold concrete, and it might be cold, but not that cold. But as soon as I touch it, it gets immediately cold. And one of the things we know, a lot of simple tricks, but camping in the boundary waters, so it's 20, 30 below in the evening, especially for cold camping. It's amazing, even with really warm winter boots or mucklucks on, if you put a blue foam pad down on the ground and stand on that, you'll instantly notice a difference in the warmth of your feet. Your feet lose a lot of heat through conduction to the ground. Oh, and convection, I got those out of order. Convection is wind. So we've heard about wind chill. We plan for that with our shelter system and dressing appropriately with wind layers. So photo there, that's at the Cold Weather Leader School. That was a 30 below morning. We have a snow kitchen. A couple MSRs lined up, boiling water to get people hydrated and fed for the morning. So managing your body heat. And I do a podcast, radio episode on my site all about this, managing the internal furnace in your body. One of the things we do with the Scouts is the national organization does not allow hot tent winter camping. They think there's risk there. I may have some personal difference of opinion in terms of where the risks lie or what's risky or not. But anyway, the point being, we have to take people from all over the country and teach them how to camp in extreme cold conditions, make sure they have fun and they don't get hypothermia, they don't get frostbitten, they don't get trench foot, all those conditions, really just using their bodies, all cold camping. So how you eat, your activity, how you dress. And one of the things I like about that is, hey, if you develop those skills and that knowledge and that experience, and that, the comfort level with that, everything else is a piece of cake. If you go to hot tent winter camping, it's a whole lot easier. So a couple things here. Food, I think we all know this, not a time to diet, stoke the boiler, high calorie food, eating regularly, scrap the meal plan with breakfast, lunch, dinner, or, have those meals, but you need regular snacks too, to keep your energy level up, keep your calories burning. Fats, it's a great time to have those. Carbohydrates for longer lasting. The simple carbohydrates, having some sugars or some easy snacks. And, the protein can give you that, the meat sweats, the thermogenic effect from eating a protein meal. But you need to stay hydrated. Okay, one of the biggest issues we have in guiding winter trips is people get dehydrated. It's not like you're out in the summer where you're sweating, you recognize it's hot. Oftentimes it's people aren't drinking enough water, and the air is dry and they are sweating, even if they don't notice and feel it as much. And, it's a big problem anytime dehydration is. But in the winter, you get dehydrated, volume of your blood drops and your circulation goes down. You don't digest your food as well. And those things in your body is not running as warmly as it should. And so hydration is very important. One of the little tips that we do with the Scout program is they have neck lanyards with like an old wool sock sewed across the bottom, or a fleece pouch where the water bottle can ride right in there, inside someone's parka, inside their warmth layer, next to their body. And it does a few things. It keeps that water from freezing. First of all, when it's 20 below zero, because it's next to your body, it makes it easy. If it's in a thermos, in a pack tied on your toboggan, it's harder to get to. And lots of times people don't want to hold up a trip or slow folks down. And if it's right there, it's easier to get at, to keep drinking regularly. But also as a leader, as a parent, as a leader, as a guide, it's much easier to check on people and see how much they're drinking, to see if they're staying adequately hydrated. So you can monitor the inflow that way. If it's easy to just kind of check on everyone's water bottle and see how much they've been drinking. And you can also monitor the outflow. And ideally you're looking for fairly clear and copious outflow, and maybe light straw color, not that dark yellow snow. So okay, exercise is obvious. One of the things I like to say is, hey, when you're getting cold, you gotta own your warmth. You gotta work for it. You need to eat some food. You need to adjust your clothing. You need to drink. You got to figure out if you have something wet. And sometimes you just got to exercise. Get out there, shovel snow, cut firewood. Take a night hike. Get your body warmed up. There's a tendency for people to kind of get small and hunch up and bend over and get very quiet and withdrawn. And those are kind of early symptoms of facing a heat challenge and early signs of hypothermia. And you need to kind of work at that and get active and warm up. So, okay, the next point, this is one of the biggest ones. I get asked all the time, hey, Scott, what kind of boots should I get? I always get cold feet, or, what kind of mittens, or what kind of sleeping bag? All good questions. But before getting into the gear, I like to really focus on the core, the elements, the principles. And one of the big ones is circulation, your body's blood flow. I used to get cold feet and hands all the time. And I didn't realize this, that if your internal organs are facing a heat challenge, your body's core temperature starts falling out of that fairly narrow band around 98.6 degrees. It's amazing, but your body will thermoregulate, and it will actually cut off blood flow to your extremities. And I mean, it does this, it really does this. It can cut off over 90% of the blood flow to your extremities. So if your core is not dressed adequately, you might start getting cold feet, you might get cold hands. It doesn't matter what boots or what mittens you have. You're going to be facing a serious heat challenge. So it's one of the reasons why a vest works well as an extra layer. It really helps keep those internal organs nice and warm and keeps the blood, keeps the pump house warm, so the blood keeps flowing throughout your body. Your head and neck, they don't vasoconstrict, because your brain's up there. So your body keeps sending blood to your brain. And that's why maybe your grandma told you, if your feet are cold, put a hat on. Your head doesn't have much insulation, has a lot of blood flow. So you radiate off a tremendous amount of heat. So keeping your head well insulated helps keep that in. Your neck, I was lucky enough to do a lot of winter survival courses with a fellow named Morris Kohansky, who's a very well-known instructor for the Canadian Air Force and University of Alberta. And he used to say that, wearing a scarf around your neck is equal to wearing an extra sweater. And it's one of the easiest things you can vent to keep from overheating and wrap up to help keep yourself warm. The other part of the circulation is your clothing, having it being loose, layered to capture the air, but also to allow good circulation. We will talk about these things and talk about how important they are. And many times I'll still see people, piling on extra socks and trying to, I've seen people physically straining, like trying to pull their boots on, shoving them in there. I'm thinking they're going to have cold feet. If I get a terrible wound, one of the first things I might do is apply direct pressure. And it's really bad, I might put a tourniquet on there to stop the blood flow. Well, people inadvertently, essentially put tourniquets on themselves and cut off that circulation. You really want the clothing to be loose and layered to allow good blood flow. A lot of the the fancier brands, the stuff you see in the nice mountain shops designed for ski culture, that type of thing. It's form fitting, it's snug, it looks good. That's not really how you want to dress in northern Minnesota when it's really cold. You know, you want your clothes kind of bulky and loose. So core and shells just reference that body's, you know, shutting down flow to the exterior. So okay, dressing for warmth. I think a lot of these are probably fairly familiar principles, but I'll just hit on a few. You know, there's an old, I believe, Scandinavian saying, you know, no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. And I think that's very true. There's definitely a science to dressing for the warmth. You should really consider your clothing, you know, shelter that you wear a top priority. And as I mentioned, as I was trained, you know, you should think about when you're going out in the woods, in the outdoors, that, you know, do you have enough clothing where you could spend 72 hours outside with just the clothing you have with you? I think a lot of people head out skiing, dress very lightly because they're planning on being super active and pumping up a lot of warmth. So it's going to be difficult for that person to have that much extra clothing. But, you know, some of the nice lightweight down layers and things don't take that much space in a pack. The colder acronym, that's just to help reminding you of some principles. You want to keep your clothing clean. If it gets dirt in there, that clogs up the weaving in the clothing, and it starts conducting heat away. You want to avoid overheating. That's the O-L. You want your clothing loose and layered. You want to keep your clothing dry. That's the D. And the E is examine and repair. It's an acronym that comes from the military. Layers. Everyone's heard dress in layers. That's like you know, one of the top 5 phrases in Minnesota. Dress in layers. Okay, but it's not just that the layers are trapping warm air. In my mind, you really want to make sure those layers are using the appropriate materials, the right thicknesses, the right design, so that you're also moving moisture away from your body to prevent that evaporative heat loss. So no cotton next to your body. You know, cotton is death cloth. Cotton is rotten. Cotton kills. All those good sayings. You want to keep those away from your body. You want things like synthetics, like polypropylene or wool, you know, merino wool next to your body. Coarser wool is sweaters. Those do really well. So the layers, yes, they help trap air. They move moisture if you're doing it properly. And it allows you to regulate your temperature a lot easier than just one big thick layer. Another thing, if you're going to be spending any time out in the field, whether planned on a camping trip or unplanned in emergency situations, you know, thinner layers are easier to dry out in the field than a big thick layer. Often if people show me like, hey, Scott, look at my pants, you know, and they're like the pants with the built-in laminated, you know, lining or insulated lining. I don't like those. You know, I like those for shoveling the snow or maybe going to a football game or something like that. I don't wear that type of thing out in the field. I want almost everything to be independent layers, including things like my mittens, so I can take the pieces apart. And if I'm cold camping, those might go in my sleeping bag so my body heat can dry them out. And if I'm doing hot tent camping, you know, they hang from a cord inside the tent so the nice warm radiant heat from the stove can dry it out. So the thin layers are much easier to dry out. Moisture management is the name of the game if you're going to be out in the field for any length of time. I was just talking with an outdoors writer, was quoting the Mankato paper a couple of weeks ago, and keeping your feet warm. He said, I got these great boots, but I was just camping in the Boundary Waters last winter, and by the 3rd day, my feet, you know, they're just cold. Well, we talked it through. They're the classic pack type boots with the removable liners. He wasn't removing the liners. He wasn't doing anything to dry out the liners. He didn't have spare liners. It was just simply accumulated frost. And that's a real challenge, particularly in footwear. So there is something that I found that I learned was very, very helpful if you're really going to be going out in very cold temperatures for any length of time. And that's the concept of wet cold versus dry cold. Most of us are dressing for, you know, a lot of different conditions, you know, cold, but if it's consistently below, say, 15 degrees Fahrenheit, that's a dry cold. If snow falls on you, it might land on you, but it's cold enough outside, you can just brush it off and it's not going to melt. The main issue there is you're not as worried about environmental moisture. You're worried about perspiration from your body getting into your insulation, your clothing, into your boots, into your socks, into the liners, in your sleeping bag if you're camping, or into your layers, because your body is 98.6 degrees, it's humid, you're even if it doesn't feel like it, there's what's called imperceptible perspiration. You're giving off moisture. And if it's 10 below zero or 20 below zero, that dry, cold temperature, that moisture is traveling out from your body. And at some point, it's going to hit a freeze point from that very cold outside air. And the problem is a lot of the modern outdoor clothing, Gore-Tex, high-tech synthetic fabrics that are supposed to be a breathable membrane, your body heat isn't able to pump that moisture through that membrane before it freezes. So I've seen many times leading a winter camping trip in the Boundary Waters, that photo of me with the red jacket in my left hand and your right, that type of jacket, someone will open up like that, and there'll be sheets of ice and frost in there because that vapor wasn't able to move away. So reason I mention is one good exception to the no cotton rule is in a situation like we're one of the few places in the country that has it, like northern Minnesota, where it's a true dry cold. A thin cotton layer can actually make an exceptional wind layer because it blocks the wind. It's nice and quiet. It's durable. It's not going to melt near fire, but it's very breathable. It lets your body moisture out. So you see a lot of the traditional winter campers. You see a lot of the natives. People live in the north. They often have cotton anorak, cotton wind pants. And what do they wear on their feet? They're not wearing rubber bottom boots when it's a very dry cold like that. They're wearing mucklucks with either just a cotton shell or a hide that's completely breathable. It's not going to keep your foot dry in slush or snow, but it's going to let that foot moisture out in that very dry, cold temperature and keep you nice and comfy warm. My last point there, just one other way of dealing with this that works pretty well. It's not my favorite, but it is used widely in the mountaineering community, and it works the other way. Instead of being super breathable, with say a cotton layer in the dry cold or a breathable membrane and appropriate layers in more moderate temperatures, is actually just trapping that sweat next to your body. And about as fun as it sounds, but that's the vapor barrier liner idea or theory. And so if you have the traditional pack boots like I'm wearing in that photo, rubber bottomed, they're going to capture the perspiration from your foot. One of the things that you could do is wear a thin liner sock, your thin merino sock or polypropylene sock, and put a bread bag or a baggie over your liner sock, and then put on your thick wool sock. And what happens is it keeps all the moisture next to your body, and it doesn't degrade your insulation with that moisture. You can do it in a sleeping bag as well. So you can buy a nice nylon vapor barrier liner to put inside your sleeping bag. So as you're sleeping, you're giving off this moisture. It's not going to frost up inside your bag. Or you can make one out of trash bags. I've done it only as an experiment. I don't particularly like it. I like using other methods, but it is something to be aware of because it's very light, it's very handy, and it does really add to the warmth of your system and protects the insulation. So, okay, so maybe just a couple thoughts on feet and hands. And I have a really extensive blog post on warm hands in winter where I go into great detail on mittens and keeping your body warm. I've got a radio episode on warm feet. They're both on the site if you want a bit more. But here's some of my favorite footwear. And a lot of my winter stuff, people look and say, well, I don't recognize that, or what is this stuff? You look like a hobo. I use a lot of military surplus stuff for a few reasons. It used to be because I'm cheap and it's cheap. I really appreciate it as a financial advisor by day. Barry's comment about breaking the $25 into 7 cents per day, that tickled warmed my heart there. But a lot of military stuff can be had fairly cheaply. Like in the middle there, you see Canadian military surplus mucklucks. There's some wonderful boutique manufacturers here in Minnesota of really nice winter gear, and highly encourage you to support them if you can. But the Canadian military mucklucks are pretty good. The green U.S. Air Force, I think they're called like N1B mucklucks. They're really ugly. They're green, but guess what? They work just as well, and they're fantastic. On the left are the military vapor barrier boots, and they have thick layers of wool felt in there, and it's soft rubber. And if you can kind of see in the ankle holes there, the felt liner is completely encased. So there's no way for foot sweat or slush or snow to get the insulation wet. So they're big, they're bulky, they look weird, but they're extremely warm. And then on the right, those black boots, those are some of my favorites. And guess what? Those are just simple, soft rubber galoshes made by Tingley Company. They're 16-inch high, soft rubber. I can roll it up about the size of a water bottle. And you see on the right there some insoles. I put a thick pair of insoles in the bottom and liners inside, and they're extremely comfortable. They're nice and warm. In part because like a muckluck, they let your foot bend and flex and the muscles work. They allow for very good circulation, and it's no problem. They're so light for me to carry an extra pair of insoles, extra pair of liners. If they start getting damp, I just rotate them out. So some of my favorite winter footwear. Mittens here again, I tend to like the traditional stuff. This is top tips for the winter woods. If I was talking about skiing in the mountains, some of these things might be a little bit different. They might be geared towards more lightweight gear, more nylon and synthetic things where ounces really count. In the woods, you're often brushing up against, spruce trees and things like that, sometimes snapping up firewood, and some of those, a little bit pricier, lightweight materials, they're torn a little bit more easily. But I think the key thing here is, like in the middle, those are the green and gray mittens. Those are Swedish military gauntlets. They're super cheap, and I just wear a thin wool glove like the one on the right, and a wool mitten over the top, and that shell on top, nice and warm. And the whole thing comes apart, and I carry extras. If the mitts get a little bit damp, I can put them on my shoulders inside my jacket to help dry them out with body heat. I can put them against my stomach inside my shirt to dry them out with body heat. I can dry them out near a fire. Since they're wool, they're not going to melt. All the synthetic stuff, the fleece stuff, melts just like that. Be very careful around fires. So these things are super warm. These are kind of my emergency mitts. I bring a pair when I'm leading winter trips in case someone's getting cold hands. There again, they're military surplus flyer mitts, ultra warm gauntlet mittens that you can buy for 25, 35 bucks. They don't have much dexterity, but they're very, very warm. So. Okay, maybe a couple things on winter camping, just to touch on a few things. There's different styles, and even in something as weird and as niche and as small a market as winter camping, there are distinctly different styles. So you got to kind of think about, well, who are you talking to? Who's giving you this advice, or what are you reading? Is this someone who's doing mountaineering? Is this someone who's doing backcountry skiing? Is this someone who's backpacking, maybe in more moderate climates, or are they winter camping in northern Minnesota? And even there you have different styles. I find it fascinating how narrowed down. But you'll hear people talk about hot tenting, cold tenting. Those are kind of two main branches here. Hot tenting is the traditional way of living in the North Woods. Okay, a tent, traditionally a lightweight cotton canvas tent. We're using a sheet metal stove inside with a chimney jack, and you run that stove in there, and it is the best. It is a wonderful way to camp. It's like having a portable cabin. You can relax, which I think the psychological end of it cannot be underestimated. It's a place where you can go and you can relax. You don't have to worry about that impending doom of dark coming and temperatures plummeting. You can dry out your clothing and your sleeping bag in there, which means you could live in a hot tent, indefinitely in the winter, as long as you keep getting firewood, because you can dry things out. And so it's a fun way, but it does have its drawbacks, and it's not appropriate in every place. And the hot tent winter camping gear is fairly expensive. So, but it is experiencing resurgence, and we're really kind of in the epicenter of it right here in Minnesota and northern Wisconsin, with snow tracker tents and 4-dog stoves, and Cook Custom Sewing makes great hot tents, and so there's some great things here. Alaska, Canada, northern Maine, some other areas where it's really experiencing a resurgence because it's just a fun way to live in the winter. But you don't have to do it that way. The cold tent style that has a lot of background. People are into winter backpacking, ski touring, Arctic explorers. As I mentioned, the scouts. They're not using external heat sources primarily. They're really doing what's called cold tent. So maybe they have a tent, but there's no heat. It's just a shelter to block the wind. So we'll talk a bit about that. Snow shelter winter camping, I think, can be a lot of fun if it's done right. If enough time is allowed, it can be very rewarding. It's free. It just requires some sweat equity in building the shelter. I've written a really extensive blog post on bullmoosepatrol.com on building quinzees, and a lot of the tips and techniques there. We spend a lot of time doing those scouts. It can be a wonderful way to go as long as you have enough time, enough snow, and the conditions are right, and you're physically up to it, because it requires a lot of work digging and piling up snow for that. There's open fire type shelters, and something I do as much as anything, even though for like 10 years, I wanted to get a hot tent set up, and I got one, but as much as anything, I simply use no shelter. I basically just roll out my sleeping bag in the snow, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. It's a way of going as well. So here's a shelter. This is the Boundary Waters. This is what we affectionately call the Russian tent. It's a Russian military patrol tent. It is a cold tent. It's basically just a wind shelter, but it's amazing. Even when it's very cold, if you get 6-8 bodies sleeping in there, the wind is blocked and you do get a little bit of benefit from body heat inside of here. There's some very nice, very well constructed, strong, lightweight, expensive mountaineering tents. Heilberg is a company out of Sweden. They make exceptional gear. Here's a photo of one of their types of 4-season tents. North Face makes some great gear. But, I went to talk a couple weeks ago, and it was a really good presentation on winter camping, but there's a lot of talk about having a 4-season tent like this, because it has stronger poles, has more coverage. It's allowed for better ventilation so you don't get frost. All that stuff's really important points, but I'd make the contention it's also completely unnecessary. You can camp in Minnesota with just a simple blue tarp to keep some wind and the snow off you. And the benefit you get from a tent like that is only a couple degrees, in terms of capturing a little bit of body heat, maybe a little bit more if you run a candle lantern in there. Some of the mountaineering people, some of the Arctic explorers will run their white gas stoves in the vestibule and cook in there, and that can definitely generate more heat. But you're certainly getting into a higher risk area there with carbon monoxide poisoning, tent fires, things along those lines. With the winter camping school for the local council here, one of the things that we do, and this is over in Northwest Wisconsin, is they have some surplus parachutes. I have a number of these I bring on trips, and you can use them a couple different ways. They make a wonderful canopy strung high over a big, large fire. So maybe for a rover group camp out, you get a parachute put up so that the ridge is just about head height. The peak is maybe 15 feet high, directly over a large bonfire. And it's amazing. It creates its own little ecosystem, its own little bubble of warm air. So it's a lot of fun to do. This is actually making a tent out of it. It's really just a wind shelter. Here you can see some scouts inside having their lunch, but it gives you a break out of the wind. Scandinavians simply call it vindsack, or I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, but it's basically just a lightweight little wind pouch they'll carry when they're ski touring in the mountains that they can all sit in and have a little bit of body heat and block the wind. So winter hammocking has become a big thing. I don't personally quite get the hammocks. I know I'm sure there's a lot of people in this call who love them and will tell me all about it as I've heard it. I think part of it's just I've got tents, I've got the regular gear for ground camping. I don't feel a big need to make a change, but people absolutely love it. And I know there's a couple, one in Minnesota and one in Wisconsin, frozen butt hangs. They're like gatherings of winter hammockers, and they've got all this special gear and they absolutely love it. So different ways of doing it. This is your real traditional wall tent. So the stove inside, this is kind of a permanent camp. Snow Trekker tent here, who I mentioned. Dwayne and Margot Lodig out of Northwest Wisconsin make these tents. It's a more portable version of the classic wall tent. It's made of a lighter gauge canvas designed to be rolled up in a duffel bag and towed with you on a toboggan, used with the sheet metal stove. Just a fantastic shelter. A lot of fun to camp in those. And there's quite a few outfitters in the Boundary Waters that will rent those if you want to try it out. Here's the same type of thing. So people are making hot tents now out of modern materials. And the big argument against that used to be that you get condensation buildup in there versus the cotton walls that breathe. The heat from the stove pushes the moisture out. And I think that's true, but this is made out of sil nylon. It's amazing. Tremendous headspace in this. I'm 6.5 feet tall. I can stand up and put my arm up in there, and lots of headspace in the shelter. And Dan Cook's designed it with some real nice ventilation points where you're running the stove. It does drive the moisture out. In Scandinavia, they use traditionally lavus. They're again probably mispronouncing, sorry, but some of these are really cool shelters. Heavier material. They're often much bulkier. They're made to really be used with a snowmobile or caribou pulling a sled. Oftentimes they run 50 pounds or something in that range. They're neat shelters. I love the look of them. Not as much usable headspace. I think really critically, not as much headspace for being able to run a line to dry clothing at night, which is one of the key features of more that A-frame type winter tent. Out west in particular, there's a lot of groups, not a lot of groups from like the mountain hunting culture, elk hunters, that type of thing. They're very interested in lightweight portable hot tents. So again, that's sil nylon single wall, like this Kifaru tent. So Okay, snow shelter, Quincy is one of the best ones for this area. We don't have the hard packed deep snow where we can cut blocks, make igloos. You can make a snow block quarry. You can work on it. There's some tools you can use where you can pack snow. You can use buckets to pack them to make an igloo. But what is quicker and easier in this area is mounding the snow, letting it sinter, hollowing out the middle, and making a snow shelter that way. So, what's great about it, it's a fun project, especially for kids. It's really exciting to make a snow shelter. They're quite warm. You get inside. I'm sure a lot of you have probably spent nights in these. Blocks all the sound, all the howling wind. Very quiet and peaceful. Not warm like a hot tent with a stove running, but you don't have to have a stove running with just body heat, maybe a candle or two. You can get these up to just about below freezing, which might not sound all that warm, but hey, if it's 20 degrees inside your Quincy and 20 below outside, that's a 40-degree temperature differential. It's a tremendous difference. So, but like I say, I've written quite a bit on that. It's a fun experience, and I like combining the two. I think that's a really great way of doing it. So I'll bring my hot tent with a wood stove, get that set up as a base place where people can relax, dry out, have meals, and then we'll build a snow shelter. I'll sleep outside. We'll try a couple different things. I mean, it's just the one last thing I'll touch on here in terms of winter camping is a couple. So this is my setup here, and this is on my deck. So a few thoughts. Practice, practice, practice. I really encourage people to practice at home before you go out winter camping. It lets you test your system. If it's not working, if you're cold, if you're having a miserable experience, you can bail out and run back in the house and get in your warm bed. Try again 2 nights later. Okay, so that's good. So hopefully your actual winter camping experience is better. It lets you test different systems. But oftentimes when I'm running trips, I'm helping people get set up. I'm cooking food. I'm helping scouts make snow shelters. I'm doing whatever I'm doing. And like I say, as often as not, I just kind of roll out and sleep under the stars. And I've done this, at 30 below. I kind of like the challenge of it. I've got a system that works pretty well for me. Sometimes I'll build a wind wall out of snow, try and get that over my head level by a bit. And that helps a little bit with wind. But it absolutely can be done. And I've written quite a bit on this as well on this site and have some radio episodes. But it's just a matter of insulation, and it's a matter of moisture management, and think about those mechanisms of heat loss. And so nothing that you see in that photo is very expensive or fancy. It's a combination of 2 closed cell foam pads, just cheap blue type ones, thermarest with the foam inside of it, one of those Mylar reflective shields for car windshields put underneath, and a foam wool blanket folded up in thirds. You can see that just barely peeking out, that green underneath the yellow sleeping bag. So that's my system underneath me. And then I've got 2 sleeping bags, 2 down sleeping bags, one inside the other. The green and yellow one's an old Cabela's mystery bag that my dad had bought 30 or 40 years ago, big oversized mummy bag. Inside of that is an LL Bean mummy bag that was rated to like 30 degrees. And over the top of that is a U.S. military Gore-Tex bivy bag. So the bivy bag helps block the wind, helps create a little bubble of warm air, which helps with that moisture management, helps that water vapor get out of my sleeping bags before it freezes. So along with, what boots should I get? What mittens should I get? What sleeping bag? I get asked that a lot. And man, there's some awesome sleeping bags. I have a friend who's got a Marmot 40 below rated sleeping bag. And I just drool every time I see that thing. I don't have a sleeping bag like that. And I don't know if I'll buy one because it's kind of single purpose. And there's a lot of advantages to using 2 sleeping bags doubled up like this. You can adjust your layers a lot more. A lot of my stuff, often I'll take off my sweater, my shirt, my wool pants. Those all go underneath my sleeping bag for an extra layer. And they get dried out and warmed up with body heat, so nice and warm, ready to go. My boot liners might go between the sleeping bags. My mittens, my socks go between the sleeping bags. So they're getting that benefit of that 100-degree warmth getting pumped out and drying all night long, but they're not right next to my body where they're stealing heat away. So the 2-bag system works well for moisture management, regulating your temperature. And so I like it. And I see I'm at about 35 minutes. I know Fran had said 30 to 40 minutes, and then maybe time for some question and answers. that's kind of what I had for, basics of staying warm and winter camping. Maybe I should take a pause and open up and see if there's some questions for the last few minutes. Barry, is that a plan or?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Any questions?
Do you prefer like a well-ventilated tent versus a tent? I mean, you sleep outside without a tent, I guess. So maybe that indicate your direction there. But
Yeah.
I've been in the Boundary Waters, really not winter camping, but it was cool, and it seems like a little bit of fresh air is kind of nice.
Oh yeah, yeah. So it's a balance, right? And without a doubt, if it's gusty and it's cold, being sealed up can be nice to prevent that convection, right? That heat loss. But I tend to work on what I'm wearing to bed, making sure my body's primed up. I don't go to bed cold. Okay, the sleeping bag doesn't warm you up. You warm the sleeping bag up. So have a little snack at night. Make sure you're hydrated. Make sure you go to the bathroom a couple times before you go to bed. Get your body warm. Oftentimes we'll play a little goof around game of soccer, go on a night hike, shovel some snow. It's not uncommon for me to, actually do some deep knee bends and, do a couple little sprints up and down the lake or something like that to get the blood moving. And, between that and my sleeping bag, I like knowing that that's enough to keep me warm for the conditions. The challenge, getting too zipped up in your tent is condensation, and it doesn't even have to be super cold. You can have issues with this, and just like right around freezing. But you can hit that dew point, and if you're too sealed up in your tent in the winter, yeah, you can just have frost inside your tent. So some people actually make frost liners, like out of a cotton sheet that they can hang inside of a tent. It's kind of an interesting project to, capture the moisture so it doesn't drip back down on you. I know some people like to run a candle lantern or two that can help drive out some of that moisture in more moderate conditions. But yeah, in general, in the deep cold, you want those flaps open and get some ventilation in there. You have some frost problems. With the canvas tents with the wood stove, there's debate. There's some people who keep the stove running all night long, or they wake up and stoke it. Other people are concerned about safety issues. They just don't want to mess with that, so they'll let the stove die down and just get it going in the morning to warm things up when they get out of the sleeping bag. But if you let the stove die down, you'll get frost built up even inside of one of those canvas wall tents, especially if you have a few people in there. But as soon as you get that stove crackling and going, it warms up and it drives the moisture right out of there.
Thanks for the presentation. Scott, can you go over again what you said about using a garbage bag with your sleeping bag? I wasn't quite following that.
Yes. Thank you. So it's related to this vapor barrier liner idea, and the idea that your body is giving off moisture all the time, even if it doesn't seem like you're sweating. Okay. And the problem is in the cold, that can lead to frost accumulating in your insulation, in your boots, in your mittens, especially in your sleeping bag. Those are some real problem areas where if you're out for an extended period of time, that accumulated frost in your gear can really, you'll start getting cold. It ruins the insulation. There's kind of a famous example. Several Minnesotans went to the North Pole in the 80s, Will Steger, Ann Bancroft, Paul Shirky. And I think in their book, North to the Pole, that came out in 1985 or something like that, they have an example on their first trip. By the end of the trip, their sleeping bags weighed like 25 pounds more because of the frost that was built up in their sleeping bag. And they didn't have a way of drying it out. They're doing cold camping. So one of the ways you can deal with that is using a vapor barrier liner. And that's putting some type of impermeable membrane close to your body to keep your sweat next to your body. So the bread bags over your feet, a thin liner sock, and then the bag over your foot, and then your thicker socks. Well, that liner sock's going to get all sweaty, and your foot might be kind of clammy and sweaty, and you need to dry it out, air your feet out at night, put some foot powder on. But that is a technique to keep your boot liners from getting too damp, too frosted up. With your sleeping bag, if you're gonna be out for a couple nights and you're cold camping, you're not gonna have a way to dry it out. This vapor barrier liner can add a fair amount of warmth because it creates an impermeable membrane, another bubble of air right next to your body. But what you would do is, wear probably thin set of long underwear, maybe a fleece top or a sweater. But inside your sleeping bag, you would put either one of the manufactured vapor barrier liners, or you can make one by having a trash bag and then another trash bag you cut the bottom out of, and you put that next to it and you tape it around. So you have 2 or 3 like that. So you cut the bottoms out. So it's a big tube. And the idea would be that goes inside your sleeping bag. As you're sleeping in your sleeping bag, it's going to add a little bit of warmth with that extra layer, but moisture will be trapped inside that garbage bag vapor barrier liner. So it won't go into your sleeping bag. Your sleeping bag will stay perfectly dry. You wake up in the morning, you're going to be kind of clammy, and a little sweaty, but you'll be warm. You'll want to switch into some dry underlayers right away, and you'll turn that vapor barrier liner inside out, put in the sun, and you'll probably frost up, and you shake off the frost and shake that out and save it for the next night. But at least your sleeping bag will be nice and dry. So that is a way of doing it. Like I say, a lot of mountaineering people where they're really concerned about weight do that. With the system I'm showed with the 2 sleeping bags and the bivy bag, that does a pretty good job of managing the moisture right there, because your body will definitely pump the moisture through the inner sleeping bag, through the outer sleeping bag, and ideally, hopefully that bivy bag will help make a frost layer so the moisture gets out of that outer sleeping bag as well.
Thank you. Very helpful. I like the idea of practicing at home first.
You got it. Yep.
I've got a question.
Yes.
So I'm warm, I'm dry, I'm well rested. But what the heck am I going to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
Well, you can eat a lot of your normal favorite camping foods, but here again, it kind of gets back into style. If I'm taking people out and we're hot tent winter camping, we're gonna have that wood burning stove. We know we're gonna have a big fire. You can do a lot of things. And part of the experience is, hey, in the evening, sitting in that tent, getting your clothes off, relaxing, the stove's roaring, maybe you have a little lantern going in there. It's nice and toasty warm. And you can do all the cooking you want. You can bake in there. Make cinnamon rolls. You can actually hang a reflector oven on the side of the stove. You can do all kinds of things. Okay, this is part of the experience. But if you're cold camping, you're doing snow shelters, you're just camping in a nylon tent in the winter, I want everything pre-made, and I want as minimal exposure as possible with my hands out. So often what we're doing with cold camping is doing like a boil in the bag method. So I'll make my chili or my spaghetti or beef stew and put it inside a Ziploc bag or an oven bag and freeze it and double freeze it. And it's just a big block of ice. And then all I have to do is get a pot boiling on my stove and put some water in there and put that bag right in there. And, my mittens are back on. It's 10 seconds of exposure with my bare hands. I can go back to kind of walking in a circle around the stove and chit-chatting with people while it thaws out and warms up. So the boil in the bag method is really what I recommend for cold type camping because it's minimal exposure. But a couple other things maybe related to that. White gas stoves in general work much better than the canister stoves. So a lot of people have moved over to the more modern, the real lightweight canister stoves, things like pocket rockets, jet boils. When it's very cold, a lot of those don't work very well. They're a lot more finicky. You can get cold weather blends, which help, but my experience is they're not quite the same as some of the old standbys like a MSR Whisper Light or an old Optimus 111 or a Coleman. The Coleman stoves work pretty well. Those white gas stoves, you might need to prime them, a little fuel, but you get them going, they can crank out 8,000 to 10,000 BTUs, and that's really what you need if it's that cold. If you're trying to melt snow, if you're boiling cold, lake water and getting your food going. But you got to be very careful because that gas, the fuel, doesn't freeze at 32 degrees. If it's 20 below, you spill that cold gas on your bare hand, you can get a terrible frost burn because the gas can be so cold. So if I'm doing that, I'll often bring big rubber gloves, I don't know what they're like industrial type gloves for handling the white gas. lots of snacks, and you want to get the snacks out early. What we do with the scouts is we pass out cheese sticks, beef sticks, the candy bars, and you put them in your interior pockets. You're thinking those 2 steps ahead, so their body heat is thawing those out, so they're ready to go, and their body heat, so they have them on them when they need a snack if they start feeling cold or the energy's running a little low, and that they're nice and thawed, and they're not just sitting in a pack in your toboggan, and then you're ready for your lunch break, and you're eating frosty cheese sticks. That's no fun. So it helps a lot.
Scott, would you talk a little bit more about using the candle lanterns to basically, dissipate the moisture? Is it you're hanging it? I mean, how do you do that? The safe way to do that?
Yeah, I'll say I've done this a couple times. I don't regularly do this. I have a friend who's a fan of it, but the little collapsible candle lanterns, they give off kind of a nice yellow, warm glow. My guess is if you had 1 or 2 of those hanging in a tent, it probably raises the temperature by a few degrees. And it's, I think in mild conditions, it can help keep moisture out. I haven't tried it, honestly, at 20 below. I don't know how much of a benefit it's actually going to have at that temperature, but candles in a snow shelter are really nice. They can help warm up the temperature a little bit, and it kind of, that little flickering against the snow walls is really kind of neat. So it's I think it's kind of nice for the ambiance and probably adds a little bit of warmth and probably helps a bit with moisture, but I'm not sure it solves the problem completely. I have done a few times, I'll say, with I don't do this too often, but I have one of those like Coleman catalytic heaters that you can screw the green propane bottle. And I've done this a few times when I'm camping with my boy. He just turned 6. He's a little guy, and like we were at the winter camping symposium a month ago, and it was pretty cold. It was below freezing. For him, I want to make sure he's warm, and just kind of for simplicity, we didn't have enough time to get the whole tent set up with the wood stove and everything. I'm just using kind of a normal nylon dome tent, but I would light that catalytic heater and just have it sitting on the grass under the vestibule with my tent door wide open and the one on the other side vented. They're supposed to be safe with carbon monoxide, but I want to be very careful with that. I wouldn't run it all night long, but I would turn it on before we're getting ready for bed while we're changing. And then in the morning I would light it up and then turn it off. And it helped. It makes a difference, but it wasn't, completely warm. But something like that is, I think, kind of a nice in between where it can help make it a little bit more comfortable. But there again, that propane, the green classic Coleman propane canisters don't always work well in real cold temperatures. Maybe another thought on food, the question I was asked. I love thrift stores. Go in them all the time. There's some real treasures there for winter camping and winter experiences. A few things I look for is almost every time I'll find a nice thermos bottle. I stopped buying them a long time ago because I have too many, but you want the full steel vacuum thermos bottles. You can usually buy them at Goodwill or a thrift store for a few bucks, nice big ones. That's another great solution for water. Keeping people hydrated is a real issue, but I've got a collection of these now, and I'll give everyone one of their own big, Stanley or insulated thermos bottles. And you preheat those, you get water in there. You can have, apple cider, hot chocolate, whatever stuff that's fun to drink in there, but that can help keep the water from freezing. And it's a good way, in the morning, if you're making water, you can fill up everyone's thermos so they have an extra reservoir of water. So, that's something I look for there. If you're on a budget, you can always find fleece tops at those thrift shops, zip up fleeces. They might not be as great as a brand new one, but you layer up 2 or 3 of them. They get the job done. They're cheap, they're light, they're completely hydrophobic. So the moisture is not as big of an issue with those. Old wool dress pants. So old suit pants you can buy for a couple bucks. They're thin wool, but they can make a pretty good outer layer. The wool is very heat resistant if you're around a fire. I like it because it's nice and quiet in the woods. If you're going against brush and trees, it's not making that nylon, scratchy type sound. But yeah, you can make 1 or 2 pairs of those, cut them off, layer them up, so you have extra wool pants. Even the thin dress ones oftentimes are pretty tightly woven. So if you wear 2 of those over a layer or 2 of long underwear, they're pretty good. One of the other tips on food in the morning, I learned this through the scouts up in the Boundary Waters. They always pack the kids' little vacuum packages, like the drink. What's the word I'm looking for? Like a juice box, except they're the foil pack of applesauce, and getting the water going. Put those packets right in the water, so while you're boiling water, those packets of applesauce are warm. Then we distribute them, and you can just open them up. It's like everyone has a nice little hand warmer with warm applesauce. And that's really a nice thing to have first thing in the morning, because there's some sugar in there. It gets in your system. That warm applesauce tastes really good. It kind of warms up your hands, and it gets some food in early in the system right away. The other thing that scouts do, I don't necessarily love it. It's like my once a year that I eat it, is they'll buy the Pop-Tarts that come in the Mylar foil packaging, and the heavy duty packaging that's meant for vending machines, and that can just go right in the boiling water too. So you can have your Pop-Tart with strawberry filling or apple pie filling, and there again, get some sugar in the system right away in the morning to help warm you up. But that's different. The canvas tent with the wood stove. Hey, I want to get that stove going and maybe make some bacon and eggs and hash browns and cinnamon rolls, and kind of have more of that traditional type experience.
What is your favorite place to buy military surplus?
I've bought a lot over the years, so yeah, I kind of something I blurted out, I don't know, a year ago, talking to a friend. It's become my favorite lines. My favorite sporting goods store is Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. I buy a lot of used gear, lots of stuff. You look, I have a whole wall of my garage that I'm equipped for outfitting groups of up to 15 people, but a lot of it, you can find a lot of high quality stuff used. So a lot of good used gear if you keep your eye open. Problem is, it's not there necessarily when you need it. You have to kind of constantly be searching and hunting for it. But I like it. It's the thrill of the hunt. You get that little dopamine rush when you see something good and see if you get that hit. But military surplus, there's the Sportsman's Guide out of St. Paul. I've bought quite a bit of stuff from them over the years. So they you can order through the catalog online now, obviously, or they have a big warehouse down there kind of near the train dock shipyard area there, over the South St. Paul. But a lot of stuff from Sportsman's Guide. I'd say they seem about as good as anyone. There's a couple places I've seen online and a few other shops, but I think there's Hero Surplus out of Canada. And what's a little bit unique is they have some of the good Canadian military surplus gear, and it's no surprise some of that's very good winter camping gear.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sierra Trading Post, I always recommend that to scouts to keep an eye out there, because if you go to Sierra Trading Post site and you look in their sale stuff, if you're looking for sleeping bags or tents or just all kinds of stuff, oftentimes you find things really marked down at Sierra Trading Post. And they'll usually have the deal where you sign up for their email and you get whatever 25% off your first purchase or something like that. So that's a great source. And something else I'll just throw out there is, in the Boundary Waters, the scout base up there, what they have in their equipment locker that they outfit everyone else, they say, hey, bring your regular sleeping bag, your 3-season mummy bag that you camp in year round. And they issue them a big heavy duty sleeping bag that they're sometimes labeled Browning. Sometimes they're labeled Alps. I think it's the same company, Alps Mountaineering. It's kind of a budget lower end, but they make some pretty good stuff. These sleeping bags, the tag says 40 below. They're not going to keep you warm by themselves at 40 below, but they're big, oversized sleeping bags. They're mummy, but they're kind of cut like that. They're kind of made for like big hunting and fishing guys or something like that. But you can buy these bags for like $100. I have one, and if you put your regular sleeping bag inside of this big, heavy-duty, thick Browning synthetic insulated sleeping bag, it's a very warm system. The kids, they don't really get cold sleeping in those with that system.
Any last questions? Wow, now everyone's quiet.
Well, hey, I appreciate it. Feel free to, pop me an email if you have any questions or want to talk more. Always open to it. I'm probably most active on Facebook. There's a Bull Moose Patrol page there, and that's, sometimes I'm eating my sandwich at lunch, I'll share something or comment on whatever. And but like I say, on the blog, bullmoosepatrol.com is where I've kind of got that big winter resource roundup page. And if you are interested in some hands-on classes, survival skills, those types of things, sign up for the emails or shoot me an email and we'll get you on the list. So, but really appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott. Very informative presentation.
Thank you.
I think people got a lot out of it.